Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Rise with Candice Cordelia, a Broadway World production. I'm your host, Candice Cordelia, and today, on this bright sunny day, I am so happy to be here with one of the stars who plays the understudy or a understudy for the Kite Runner on Broadway, Déa Julien. How are you, Déa?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. It's really nice to meet you. I've heard just wonderful things about you, and I'm so excited to be able to virtually meet you and talk with you today here for Broadway World. So thank you. It's an honor. You know, you're so welcome. Just speaking about the research and looking into your background, I'm so impressed. And I noticed we have some similarities I would love to talk about. And one of them is just being a first generation American. And I can relate to that because I'm also a first generation American, and that's something that's presented and infiltrated within the Kite Runner. I want to ask you first, what was it like growing up in Manhattan with the background that you have, being Middle Eastern and being in such a really lovely part of Manhattan, Chelsea, and
Yeah,
just engaging with the art scene and really just being a kid surrounded by so many different types of people?
I loved growing up in New York City. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I could never raise a kid in New York," but I think I had such a beautiful, rich childhood because like you said, there's just so much around you. There's so much art and culture at your fingertips. And then I think even more than that, you walk down a city block, right? And you encounter every type of person imaginable. And I think that that's really good for a kid because you understand from a young age that your worldview, it's not just about you. There's so many people that you're sharing this planet with. And so I think that it can make you more open, more tolerant, more understanding of people's differences. Um, you also have a lot of independence as a kid when you're here. And so you grow up quickly, but in kind of a lovely way because you start to understand who you are at at a young age. And then in terms of being first generation, New York is kind of this funny little place where because everyone's from everywhere, it almost feels just like a little global pin. So in a way, being first generation didn't feel out of place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it certainly shaped who I am and the lens through which I see the world. Because when your parents are from a different place, you're noticing differences between the way they were raised and the way you were raised, kind of from a young age. So you're looking at the things around you, knowing that it's not always like that. And I think that it kept me really present in
Mm.
this interesting way. And then sometimes, of course, you you see the kids around you and who are very, very American, and you're like, "Ah, that is not my experience." Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting too from like, for example, the fact that Middle Eastern food is everywhere now and so common and popular, but when I was a kid and I would bring, like, za'atar to school or I would have people try things, that was very, very new at that time. And so you're definitely aware of those differences from a young age.
Mm. And I can certainly also relate to that as well, even just talking about food and the culture. But I love the fact that you mentioned you didn't feel really significantly different in the sense that you were still accepted, it sounds. And I would love to know in terms of the arts and academia, what were your first memories as a child in terms of the arts? When did you know that that was a world that you wanted to immerse yourself in professionally?
I wish I could tell you about a specific moment because I hear such cool stories about that, but I just feel like I came out of the womb wanting to tell stories, and I don't know how or why. Um, my mom played a ton of music around the house. You know, she'd play opera to her pregnant belly, and so music was a huge part of my childhood and my upbringing. And I remember watching even animated movies from a young age and being like, "Oh, I want to do that." Um, And my mom used to bring me to little shows in the village, you know, little kids shows. And so I just grew up Not really, I think understanding professionally what it meant, but knowing that this would be a part of my life. And I started begging my mom for an agent when I was like 5 or 6. And she was very vehemently against children working. And so we were sort of butting heads about that. And then finally, when I was around 9, she let me audition for the children's chorus at the Metropolitan Opera. And that's when things started to really change. And I saw firsthand, oh, not only can I do this, but I'm going to do this and nothing's going to stop me.
Now, what was that experience like working as a child for the Met Opera and having that be your first formative experience in the arts professionally?
It was wild. What a way to start, right? You're in like a 3,800 seat house, sharing the stage with really the greatest classical artists in the entire world. It was an incredible education. I learned so much about discipline and professionalism and work ethic and what it takes to do a professional show. And we were doing shows in rep, so you're performing, you're in class to learn the operas, and then you're in a couple of operas at a time. Um, and I learned a ton about music and how to be on stage and take up space but not pull focus. Um, and then also for me personally, I was such a shy little person. And then suddenly I was in a situation where I realized, oh, if I want to be cast in this, if I want to be seen, I have to speak up and I have to fight for what I want. And so just developmentally, it was a really huge transformative experience for me because that's when I started to have that fight that you need to get through a life in the arts.
And certainly, I can assume that fight was applied to academia because you made it all the way to going to college and going to NYU. How important were academics along with the arts for your parents, especially in encouraging you to make sure that you had an education while also pursuing a career in the arts?
Very important. Yeah. It was always education was drummed into me ever since I can remember because that's something that no one can take away from you. Um, and I also think that just the more well-rounded your education is, the better artist you are because you have a greater understanding of the world and how it works. You have more to pull from. You have a greater ability to analyze text. Um, so I really think the more you learn, the more you grow, and the more interesting you are as a person. But also you can apply that to your art form. So it was really important. And NYU was a great place because, as I'm sure you know, it's part conservatory, but also part liberal arts education. And so you're kind of getting the best of both worlds at that time, which was really important.
Certainly, and it's an amazing college. It's one of the best. But you took some time off to pursue more of your career in the arts, and this time it was for the national tour of West Side Story. So, what led to that decision?
Well, that production of West Side Story, I had been auditioning for the show in New York when I was in high school, because sort of after the Met, I started working with representation and started auditioning. And so then when it popped up again in my life, I just felt like this was a sign and this is something that I have to do. So I took a leave of absence and I went on tour for a year and a half. And that was another really transformative experience for me. I kind of talk about it like my study abroad because it was also really the first time that I was discovering the country. I hadn't really left New York a ton to travel in the States. And so to get to do that with a show that's really beloved, and it was also a Spanish language production. It was the production that Lin-Manuel Miranda helped translate. And it was really interesting because that's not a production that a lot of people get to do. So it was really interesting to take that around the country and see the audience reaction, and how it differed from place to place. And again, just getting to play some of the most beautiful theaters in America, these huge, gorgeous, beautiful spaces. It was kind of a dream.
I can only imagine. And it's very fascinating that you stated you hadn't been outside of the country or outside of the state rather much until you were performing West Side Story. And I find personally that rings true for a lot of native New Yorkers. It's just, you feel like you're already a part of the world because there's so many different people in New York. So, you're already feeling like you're in the epicenter of just the entire globe. What was one really jarring experience that you had culturally being outside of New York while you were in this production that you can remember?
It's a good question. I think this may be a silly answer, but just the fact that in most other places people drive
Mm,
everywhere and it's not super friendly for pedestrians. That's certainly not the case in other big cities, but I found that, and I still don't have a driver's license.
okay. I understand. It
It's
took me,
so embarrassing to admit.
I get
um,
it.
but that I found quite interesting, that you really are dependent on a car to get around. And so
Mhm.
that kind of limited my own sense of personal freedom sometimes, because I felt like I couldn't get around on my own 2 feet. So that was really interesting. And then you go to certain cities or certain smaller areas, and they're just not diverse at all. And so you sometimes are going into really homogenous communities. And that was something that I wasn't super used to either. Yeah, it was interesting.
Mm. No, that answer definitely, it's perfect for me. I can relate. I'm from Philadelphia, and even so, being in a big city, sometimes you just think, what is the point of having a car if I can hop on the subway, if I can take a train? But I get it. That's a great answer, definitely. So let's get into the Kite Runner. And I love this part of your story, the fact that you were called in to audition for a female role and you asked to audition for one of the male roles.
Yeah.
What was your thought process about that significant decision?
Well, I'd gotten this audition, and it was for a female track that plays a bunch of small roles throughout the play. And so I was reading the play to prepare for that and rereading the book. And as I was reading it, I just couldn't get the character of Hassan out of my head. I was reading it and I was like, oh, I feel this part. I relate to this part. I wish I could play Hassan. That would be so cool. But I just sort of put it out of my mind because, you know, it didn't seem like something that was realistic. And then, but the thought wouldn't leave me. And so a couple of days later, I thought to myself, well, actually, why can't I? We're all playing pretend anyway, right? I don't think this would be an enormous leap for people to make. And so I kind of emailed my reps and was like, I have a crazy idea. And I was really lucky that everyone along the way thought it was a cool idea too and was really open to it. And then I went through the whole process to audition for that part, and now I'm understudying him. So I'm really excited about it.
That is so cool. That's really cool. What is your personal philosophy about auditioning as an actor? Because every actor has their own philosophy about this.
Hmm. I would say that I guess my philosophy is that and now we're kind of all stuck in self-tape land, so
Mm,
it's a little bit different also, but I do really feel like an audition is an opportunity to act that day, and it's an opportunity to play a part that might be fun to play. And so the more I can see it as the audition being the artistic goal, and then you sort of let go of what happens afterwards, the more at peace I can be with the process.
mhm.
Certainly there are those that sort of wedge their way into your heart, and then it's really hard to let them go after that. But the more I can look as at auditioning as making the art itself, even though it is a little different and it is a little weird, the more fun I end up having, and the more that reads. But I will say, in auditioning for Hassan, it was one of the greatest and most fun times I've ever had as an actor auditioning. And I think I identified that part of that is because when you're playing a boy, suddenly the pressure that you feel as a woman of being looked at, of being perceived as beautiful or hot or attractive, and having people use that as a determining factor in terms of whether you get to work or not. When I was working on this character, that I felt free of that weight, and I didn't realize how heavy it was until it was gone, where you can just suddenly, and it should always be this way, but you could just exist and be and play the character without this added element of wondering whether somebody's going to decide if you're beautiful enough to work. And that felt so freeing because I could just play. And so I want to bring that feeling to everything else I do.
Yes, yes. I love that response. I really do. And the Kite Runner, the story itself, there's a lot of themes within it, such as trauma, resilience, friendship, a lot of things that we all go through in different ways. And you mentioned earlier really connecting with Hassan. In what ways did you feel that you both shared those similarities in terms of the story and who Hassan is?
Hmm. Well, I think that one of the first things that touched me right away is I feel like with a lot of characters or people in general, really, people who are sort of vulnerable and sensitive and open are often seen as weak in our society. But with this character, those qualities and the way that he loves so wholeheartedly, those are actually the things that fortify him. And that those are the things that make him strong. And I thought that was really beautiful to see in general, and especially for a boy, where those qualities are can often be looked down on. But the fact I think he's really the strongest character in the play, from a sort of his character. Um, and so I really connected to that and the fact that he has a really deep understanding of other people. You know, his best friend and master really does
Yeah.
some pretty terrible things to him, but he's able to understand where that behavior is coming from and meet him with love. And and so that was something that I just really admire in him, as well as because of his social status and ethnic background, he is uneducated, and so people look down on him, but he's incredibly smart, incredibly intuitive, and kind and good. And so those were things that just really drew me to him. And then in terms of things I see in myself, I think he does have this mixture of toughness and sensitivity. And those are things I see in myself as well, I guess.
How do you approach the tough moments of the show, especially, with Hassan? There's one pivotal moment that has to do with sexual assault. And
Mhm.
as an actor, you have to really tap into something that it could be triggering, but it's definitely something in which you have to really approach it with kid gloves, I guess I should say. I'm very curious to know how you tapped into, especially for that scene, for that moment, how you were able to approach that scene and give it the respect that it should be deserving of.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's something that's really terrible to watch. I think that in terms of me watching the rehearsal process,
Mhm.
it was really important to start with the actual physical fight elements and make sure that everybody felt safe within that construct. And so there was always an open dialogue about that. But I think that you just have to hop on the journey of the character. That's all that you can really do, and especially in the first act, Hassan is on a really, really huge journey. And so once you start the train, it's like you're sort of already on it and you don't get off until the end. And so I think just looking at that scene through the cultural context, through the context of its time, and understanding it from the perspective of each character, I think really helps in playing it. But I don't have a great answer for you because I think you really just have to throw yourself into the storytelling of the moment because it's something that needs to happen for the story. And if you understand why it has to happen and you know that it's not gratuitous and you know that it's propelling something really important along, then I think that makes it a lot easier to be a part of.
Mhm. That is a great answer. I appreciate your answer. And one thing before we even got started that I appreciated were or are the books behind you. I'm a huge reader myself, so I love seeing books no matter where they are. So I have to ask you how familiar you were with the book The Kite Runner before joining the Broadway production.
I had read the book as a kid and I had loved the book, but I hadn't really read it since. And so I remembered the story and I was sort of familiar with it, but in reading, because I read the play first and then I went back and reread the book. But it was kind of this wonderful feeling of like revisiting an old friend that still really has the capacity to surprise you, because there were also definitely big twists and turns that I didn't remember. But at the heart of it, I think the beating heart of this story is this friendship. And I remembered that, and that the kind of glow of that had imprinted on me.
Lovely. What is the biggest takeaway being a part of the Kite Runner on Broadway that you've really just gravitated towards and will hold with you for the rest of your life, not just as a performer, but as a human being?
Well, I think it's a really important story, and a story that needs to be told. And so I think just from a purely representation perspective, I think it's important to have a play about Afghanistan on Broadway, and a play that portrays its culture and people in a positive light and shows their beauty and joy and hope in the face of struggle. Because I think that for a lot of Americans, Afghanistan came into their consciousness during 9/11, and sometimes there isn't a lot of thought to what was going on before, who are its people. And so I think this story does the important job of humanizing a group of people that have been very dehumanized in the American media. So I think that representation is super important for the Afghan community, for the Middle Eastern community at large. And I feel very proud to be a part of that, especially when I sit, because I'm an understudy, right? So I sit in the house a lot, and these are really some of the most diverse audiences I've ever seen. And as somebody who was sort of starved for representation as a kid, I feel proud that we're able to provide that a little bit. And then I think the story is about redemption, and it's about reckoning with your past and reconciling who you were with who you are and who you want to be. There's this line in the play, there's a way to be good again, that's repeated a few times. And I do believe that it's never too late to be the person you want to be and do the things you want to do.
And this is your Broadway debut as Understudy of Hassan and Sohrab, and that's amazing and fantastic. What a debut to have. So with that being said, where does Déa go from here?
Great question. In imagining my career, I really want to do it all. I am really excited by the idea of going from theater to film to musical theater to TV to, I also write and direct, so making my own films and telling my own stories. So I want to do it all the time. And I don't know which one of those things is up next. I'm working on a short film that I wrote and directed and acted in about a Syrian refugee. So hopefully that will see the light of day pretty soon. But beyond that, I'm just trying to really appreciate this experience, because I know it's going to be gone in a flash. So just trying to really stay present.
I love that. And we can't wait to see which one of those projects comes into fruition for you next, Déa. But for now, congratulations on your success being an understudy for the Kite Runner. And I believe great things will continue to be in store for you. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to interview you. You're so welcome. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You as well. And thank you all for watching another episode of On the Rise with Candace Cordelia, where I interview the rising stars on Broadway and the shows that they are a part of. Until next time, we'll see you later, and enjoy the shows on Broadway.
I'm going to run that blue kite for you.
Come back with it.
For you, 1,000 times over.
Come see me. There is a way to be good again.